Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the AgileDad University webinar series. My name is Lee Henson, president and founder of AgileDad, and I am incredibly grateful to have you all with me today. Today, we're going to cover a topic that is really close to my heart and has been for some time. Actually, a little bit of history here. We actually started covering this topic or talking about this topic back in 2014. So it's been a little while. It's been about 6 years, but we actually didn't formally put something together on the topic until around 2016 or so. So we put together our first draft of this document, and it was done through a series of blog posts. But what we found was that it was disconjointed and it really didn't come together the way that we wanted to. So this is our approach to a humanized, pragmatic, agile approach. It's a 12-step program. Now, in no way is it intended to belittle or belabor or make fun of 12-step programs. My background is in psychology. My degree is in psychology. So I wanted to share this with you as a way to show you that Agile's not all or nothing. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we hear is that Agile is an all or nothing initiative, that you either are Agile or you're not Agile, that it's a red pill, blue pill, one size fits all approach. And that couldn't be any further than the truth, right? So we put together this program. Now, there's some rules before we get started. So let's make sure we get the rules out of the way. Rule number one, this is not all or nothing. So you don't have to be doing all 12 of these steps in order for you to consider yourself Agile or to have business agility. In fact, many organizations like to dip their toe in the water and try a few steps and see exactly where they are so that they can experiment with the things that are going to work best for them. And then, of course, try new things as they go. Number two, we want to make sure you understand that they don't have to be done in order. While they do work best if you do each of the 12 steps in order, they don't necessarily have to be done in order. So one of the things that I find when I go in and do coaching, many people call this the coach's playbook, and we've given it for free for years, but it's basically if you hired an AgileDad coach to come into your organization, these are the first things that we would look for inside of your company. These are the first 12 things that we would try to identify and see where you are. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, just a little bit about AgileDad. We've been around since 2012, servicing organizations. We have 2 main offices and 1 satellite office. Our 2 main offices are here in Orlando, Florida, where I'm broadcasting from today, and in Salt Lake City, Utah. We also have a satellite office in Sydney, Australia, so that's kind of cool. So we have a lot of clients there, so we thought it might be a good idea to branch out and go there. But our mission is to help figure out for organizations how we can best assist them in stretching and in doing their Agile implementation in a way that's going to make sense to them from a pragmatic, humanistic approach, but also from, an understanding that we need to balance the strategic needs of the organization with the consumer's needs and with the needs of technology where applicable. So just a reminder, we do have one more webinar coming up. That webinar is coming up at the beginning of August, and that one's going to be for Agile leadership. As far as upcoming courses are concerned, we have them all here. We have the advanced and the level 1 certified Scrum product owner and certified Scrum master courses coming up. On the right, you'll see Mountain or Eastern Daylight Time. That way you can kind of get your head around which one suits you best. Now, if you already have your certification, we encourage you to invite others to come on over. Our online certifications have been top-notch, and we've had lots of good feedback about those. So we encourage you when you get a chance to come on by and check those out. And of course, if you mention that you're here at the webinar, we can extend a discount to you if you want to catch up on any of those classes. In addition, we've posted all of the previous 6 webinars. I know it's hard to believe there have been 6. But we have 9 powerful ways to keep your teams motivated, understanding the force, the 5 values of Scrum, the 7 deadly sins of technical debt, the art of Agile estimating and forecasting. We just did recently the Agile Meetings Playbook. There are tons of free webinar information, and the videos are available on AgileDad.com underneath our videos section in the downloads. So do take advantage of that. In addition, we do have our podcast available, the Daily Stand-Up. This week, we published our 65th episode of the Daily Podcast. The cool thing about that is it's a 15-minute or less shot in the arm. So if you just want a little taste of something Agile that you can catch on to every day, I do encourage you to go grab that. You can subscribe. It's available where all major podcasts are. So tune in, iHeartRadio, all the good stuff, Apple Podcasts. It's out there. So if you just go ahead to Google and do your search and search for the Daily Stand-Up, and if you put AgileDad there, you'll get a whole bunch of different places you can go see it or listen to it rather. All right. So without any further ado, let's get started. So today, our focus is going to be on the 12 steps that you can do to help your organization really get their head around Agile. And I like to start with one that's really interesting. So if you've ever heard of a 12-step program before, whether it's to fight alcoholism or to break a habit, one of the first things they say is for you to admit that there's a problem and disclose, what are you trying to do or why do you think it's a problem? What steps are you going to take to try to solve the problem? Now, I have personally been invited to go and coach inside of many organizations. And right away, they say, we have problems. We're not getting things to market fast enough. We don't have 100% productivity. We're seeing struggles within our organization. So we're going to implement the Agile. I'm like, do you even know what that means? And they're like, well, of course we do. We hold that 15-minute meeting every day for at least 30 or 45 minutes. We break things down into 6-week chunks or 8-week chunks. We get coordination across all of our managers, and I'm just like, oh, are you kidding me? And part of it is that they may be wanting to do Agile in name only, but I think the bigger threat is that they really don't know why they're trying to do Agile, or they're trying to do Agile for the wrong reasons. I had one gentleman who was a CEO of a company come up to me and he's like, I'm so glad you're here. We're so excited to have you help us implement Agile. I was feeling pretty good about this. And then he says, I recently read the book Twice the Work in Half the Time. So we're looking forward to you implementing twice the work in half the time. And we're looking forward to that 1,500% increase in productivity that comes along with it. And I was just thinking to myself, if those were the reasons why you're trying to do Agile, especially with a plate of technical debt, a full load of technical debt on the teams, it was like the whole office was on fire, like this picture. But yet this person looked to Agile to solve everything. And what we quickly found was that, even if you understand Agile implicitly and you understand all the things that you should be doing, if you don't really know what problem you're trying to solve, it doesn't do you much good. So I think the first step is to figure out what problem are you trying to solve and why did you choose Agile to solve the problem? Sounds simple, right? But the first step is always simple. They get a little more complicated as we go. So let's dive into number 2, because we want to make sure we end on time. So number 2, this is about setting management and leadership level, executive level expectations. One of the things that I've found is that there's a difference between organizational strategy and vision and product or service vision and strategy, right? They're two different things. And I think that sometimes we fail to look at the organizational vision and strategy and fail to understand that. And we don't really know what's expected from a leadership perspective or what's expected of the teams that are going to be building the product or service. There seems to be a disconnect. It's just disjointed. And, I did a lot of research and I have some good friends who are executives, and I contacted some of my friends from Shark Tank. And one of the things that they said is when people come on Shark Tank, there's usually 2 things that are missing. 1, they don't know their numbers, or 2, they don't have a real clear strategy statement, an elevator pitch, a vision statement. So I asked what one might look like, and I did some research. And in a book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, I want to make sure I get the author's name right. It was Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm. It's more of a sales book, but inside he talks about this 20 to 30 second approach to selling your product or service or to getting your point across. And it kind of flows like this. For our target customer who is struggling with this problem, our product or service is this type of product or service that provides this key benefit, a compelling reason to buy it. Unlike our competitor's product or service, our product does this different or better and can be applied where. So for those of you who aren't keeping track, that answers all the key questions: the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So let's go through and talk about those. But before I do, someone just mentioned that my video is freezing a little bit. I apologize for that. As long as the sound's still good, we're going to keep going. And hopefully that video will clear up here in just a few moments. And I apologize for that. If necessary, we'll shut down the video and just let you focus on the presentation. That way it'll be better for you. So when we're talking about setting this who, what, where, when, why, and how, we want to say for who, who is our target audience? So for who, who, why, what problem are they struggling from, right? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose? The what, which is our product or service, is a more defined what that provides us with this key benefit, a compelling reason to buy. That's how it solves the problem. Unlike why, when is important, why we're doing this right now, our product provides this value where. Someone mentioned in the comments, it's a lot like a user story pitch, and it is. The difference is this pitch is a little more inclusive, so that way it includes some more details. But I think the bigger thing about this is that it maps the product or service vision and strategy with the organizational vision and strategy. And I think sometimes, we all feel like we're in a position where someone's asking us, bring me a shrubbery, or build me a box, or bring me a rock. And when you don't know all the details behind, what exactly is being asked for, where you're trying to go with this, it sets these weird expectations where management expects, oftentimes, here's a perfect example. So I was in an organization very recently who remain unnamed, and there was a senior vice president who came up, and he commented to me. He said, I really appreciated you giving us a copy of the Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles. And I said, yeah, I love that, and I'm glad you're enjoying it. And his comment back to me was, this really may help me understand that I can change things at any time, because it says we can make changes even late. And I tried to explain that, that's not exactly what the manifesto says, but that it's important for us to recognize that as long as the changes that we're making are supportive of the sprint goal and supportive of helping the teams build whatever they're trying to build, that we need to realistically set expectations, that we also have to make sure we're following the other principle that says that we're not going to overburden or overload people and have people working nights and weekends to get something done. So I think there's a fine balance here. And I think it's just so important for us to get in touch with our leadership and to let our leadership know exactly what we're trying to achieve, and making sure they understand that, hey, it's okay, right? And that we're going to do the best we can to meet those initiatives, to meet those goals, and that we are going to try hard to do what we can in order to help them realistically understand how far we can go so that they can forecast. So we're going to do as hard as we can with what we have to produce a high quality product or service. And in return, we expect them to be realistic with the goals for what we can do on the flip side. And I think that's something that, gently needs to be touched on inside of every organization I've been to. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video so that way you can focus on the actual presentation, since it seems to be stopping a little bit. Okay. The next initiative focuses on the roles, defining the roles, having a clear distinction of every Agile role and responsibility. There was one organization that I recently visited where their focus was, they said, we have so many people who want to have input and they all want to be product owners. Can you help us determine who the real product owner is? And I asked them, I said, how many people are vying for this position? How many people want to be product owners? And they said, well, it depends on the product, but on one product, we have 46 product owners. I said, 46? That's a few too many. 45 too many. I was just like, how can you have so many product owners? It just didn't make sense to me. But then they explained. They said that we have, well, they're not all true product owners. I said, okay. They said we have product owners, product managers, product liaisons, we have solutions managers, we have solutions architects, we have product architects, we have project owners, and they went on and on with this list, and I couldn't believe it. They even had a role called Scrum owner, who was a product owner of the daily stand-up, and I was just like, this is getting crazy. But what they really had was a whole host of stakeholders who were all fighting for the position of product owner, and they had some key stakeholders mixed in there. They had a sponsor mixed in there, but they didn't really have a clear distinction of the roles. Then when I tried to help them understand the roles, the one role that they asked me to better explain was a business analyst. So we took some time to sit down with them and explain the role of the business analyst. And they quickly said, well, that's impossible because that's not what our business analyst does. You must be reading a different Agile than we are. That's not what and I was like, whoa, let's slow down here. Just because my definition of business analyst may be different than your textbook definition of business analyst. Doesn't mean that either one of us are right or wrong. What I was trying to explain, and I think this is the key, is that depending on the product or service that you're building, you may not have someone by title that fills those exact sets of responsibilities. I think what's more important is that we listen to the responsibilities and make sure that we have coverage across the responsibilities. So, for example, if we're talking about a business analyst being engaged with the team, do we have someone who is engaged with the team? Do they have their thumb on the pulse of the consumer? Is that somebody different? And I think our goal is to make sure that we have coverage across all the responsibilities in order to make sure Agile works. As far as what you call them, you can call them a business liaison, a business manager, a business analyst. You could call them gummy bear number 78. I think what I'm trying to figure out is how do we best map the responsibilities to individuals inside of the organizations and get that mapping right. And on one team, if it's a different title or another title, so be it, at least initially. Our goal then is to try to synchronize across the teams so that we can have a clear distinction of what the titles do, what the roles do, and then we can align the people. Because the truth is, when people understand what their role is, they're willing to embrace what they should be doing, and it makes Agile a lot easier, right? So I think this is one of the big pitfalls that I see. It's a common one, but it's one that we see often. So another has to do with backlog item creation. Now, this one's near and dear to my heart because I think every organization in the world struggles with this one. How do we create the perfect backlog item? How do we get things aligned? And oftentimes we have the product owner, just like this one, this young lady here saying, do all the things, and I think it's hysterical. But product owners just, they have the best interest in heart, but they're not preparing the backlog in such a way that it's easy to consume. When organizations embrace Agile, they think less is more, which is true, but they tend to focus a lot on output. And what ends up happening is they wait so late in the process to put new things in or to change things or to deliver things. And they'll lean on a manifesto or principles and say, hey, well, Agile embraces change even late, that they're missing a core tenet here. They're missing something that's key. They're not using the backlog in a way that you can productively predict what can be done, or not using the backlog in such a way that the team can easily consume the right size stories. So I think one of the things that I often promote when I walk into organizations, I say, when it's time to reduce the backlog, you have two things you need to do. The first is make sure you have the right focus and representation, meaning you should only have one product owner, and then that one product owner should have some help from some people input wise. It's still the responsibility of the product owner to make the final decision, but that product owner should have input from someone who represents the end consumer. In this case, I might call them a business analyst, but it's someone that's got their thumb on the pulse of the consumer, that understands what's happening, that can bring that consumer awareness to us. Someone that's willing to meet with training and find out the things the consumer's clamoring for, or meet with support and find out the things that people are struggling with. That way we can, get those items in appropriately. We also need representation from the business side of the house so we understand strategically where we're trying to go. And we need representation from the team to see technologically whether this is feasible or the right thing to do it or the right way to build it. And I think that oftentimes we miss that. So in addition, since that's number one, we also need to be following the INVEST method when we create backlog items. Now, INVEST is something that I typically cover in my product owner classes. It was by William Wake, aka Bill Wake. And he says that INVEST is an acronym. The I means that all backlog items should be independent. We should try to make sure we avoid dependencies when possible, make sure we're building things in a way that makes sense. The N is negotiable. Negotiable means that we shouldn't lock in scope in such a way that people are, not willing to have a conversation, right? It's not set in stone. It's nothing too rigid. We need to make sure we're having conversation. The V is for valuable. So we want to make sure that we're adding value as we go, and that we are focused on each backlog item adding some value. Now, while it doesn't need to be releasable at the end of the sprint per se, it should be potentially shippable and adding value to what we have without increasing the debt. The E is for estimable or estimable, because estimatable is not a word. No, really, estimatable is not a word. So a lot of people will use that word. And, I'm a junkie for words. I took Latin for 12 years. So estimable means that we can estimate the size or scope of the item. And then S, of course, follows through with sized appropriately, small when available. We want to make sure we keep things really concise. And then the T comes to testable. And that means that everything that we should do should have some type of way to test it. Now, that doesn't always mean testing code. I want to be clear here. You might be building a product or service that doesn't have any code. So testable just means that we have a way to prove that we are testing and doing what we need to do. We had a question that asked about, if you're using very large programs with 4,000 to 5,000 people, and you have to have a lot of product owners, of course, so the example I like to use is I was working with a company called Microsoft. You might know them. And on some of their products, they'll have multiple product owners for a single product. And what ends up happening is those product owners still all boil up to someone like a chief product owner or a VP over that product. So what ends up happening is if there needs to be a critical decision made, someone will make that decision when it comes to a head. So while it's important for us to make sure we understand that for most products, we only have a single product owner. If it makes sense, if you're an organization with many, many thousand people, sure, you may have to scale that. And that's a separate conversation when it comes to scaling. But in this case, we're assuming that most organizations at the product level could have a single product and that teams could swarm to build that product, and that teams are associated with relative scrum masters. Scrum masters govern teams. So that way the teams can swarm to the product and help get that product or service delivered sooner. So we want to make sure that when it comes time to scaling, that we scale at the right place. People should still be pulling from a single product backlog if at all possible, because I think it's important for us to keep all those thoughts together to help us manage the dependencies and to help avoid getting us in a bad situation where we're not sure whether we have feature completion or if we're not sure if we have outstanding debt. So it's important for us to follow this invest model and to make sure we have a clear understanding and make sure that everyone has the backlog items ready to be consumed. Sounds easy, but this is probably the hardest one in the whole batch, making sure we have the backlog prepared for the teams to consume. The next one's one of my favorites, proper Agile meetings. So when I talk about holding a proper Agile meeting, it means with the correct purpose, the right attendees, and a clear agenda. So my rule is no agenda, no meeting. So I often tell people, I'm like, hey, if there's no agenda, there's no meeting. We're not going to have a meeting if there's not something clear that we need to be doing. Also, I want to make sure we have the right people in attendance. I often see meetings that are just held for the sake of having meetings. So I love this example here. So I love this example here where it says, all right, let's get started. And the gentleman asks, what department are you from? And someone says, I don't actually work here. I just heard there'd be free food, right? I think part of it is just we need to have a real good understanding of, what the agenda is, but also what the purpose of the meeting is. And we need to make sure that we're inviting as few people as necessary to get the job done. I think sometimes we do meeting overkill because everyone wants to be involved. But I think that it's better for us to have smaller, more concise meetings for shorter time frames with fewer people where we can have actionable results. This is in line with some of the scaling calls, with some of the scaling prototypes, specifically Scrum at Scale, where they talk about this very specifically. I think it's just important for us to understand that when we start to grow as an organization and when we start to scale, that we literally have to recognize that the last thing someone technical wants to do is be in a meeting. The last place that someone wants to be is spending time away from working on a product or service. So I think it's just important for us to focus on these meetings and to outline who should be in attendance, how often a meeting should be taking place. And the great news is, we have that Agile meeting playbook that was just recently released. Now that document is brand spanking new. It's less than a month old, and we've had wild positive response as a result of releasing that document. So if you haven't gotten a copy of that, I encourage you to go grab a copy of that from the AgileDad, agiledad.com/comics. It's on that page, and it's a very handy document to have. Someone asked specifically about a certain meeting. They said, how important is it to have the product owner attend a daily stand-up? Without the product owner there, I feel like it creates an environment where even though this meeting is for the core team, I think that the product owner is part of that core team. They need to be able to address questions, address issues, and really help adjust. So if the team needs to make fine-tuning adjustments or pivots, this is the opportunity for the team to present those to the product owner. So I think it's pretty critical that the product owner be at the daily stand-up. I don't know that I would cancel the daily stand-up if they didn't show. I'd have the team have the daily stand-up anyway. but I do think it's critical for the product owner to be represented there, because I feel like, there are often times where a simple question or a simple comment from the product owner could clarify something and keep the team moving forward, avoiding a dependency or avoiding an impediment that would need to be resolved later in the framework. So I think the key here is making sure you have the right conversation and the right communication, making sure you have the right people in the meeting, but keeping the meeting short and tight. So I'm a big fan of having more frequent meetings with fewer attendees with an actionable outcome or result. This never works if the outcome's not present and it doesn't have, an actionable result. We have one additional question I'll throw out there before we move on. Somebody asked, what about the retro? Should the product owner be present in the retro? And my answer is this: I feel like it's important for the product owner to be present in all team meetings. And should the product owner be in a retro? Absolutely, for some amount of time. I don't know that they need to be there for the entire time, but I also feel like as the team matures, they may want the product owner there in a retro, because oftentimes that conversation around improvement could certainly involve the product owner. Now, at least initially, when you're trying to build trust within the team and you're trying to get people, up to speed, one of the things that I'll do is I'll request that the product owner attend part-time to the retro. In other words, they might come and say, hey, after the conclusion of our demo, after the conclusion of our review, we'll come and spend 10 minutes, in a retro, and they'll time box it. And that way, if the team has information for the product owner, if the product owner has feedback for the team, there's no better place to do this regarding the process other than the retro. I think the main reason why many organizations say the product owner should not be in a retro is because they don't want to turn a conversation in a retro to become all about the product. So they're trying to avoid having the product owner there to monopolize the time and turn the conversation all into product improvement. The focus of the retrospective should be on the actual working team and on process improvement, but it doesn't mean that the product owner is not invited. So based on the maturity of your teams and based on where they are, I often say integrate the product owner in for a short time. And then, of course, if they're comfortable and as they become more comfortable, go ahead and allow the product owner to attend as long as the team's okay with that. But it should never be a forced issue. The product owner should never force their way into a retrospective. I think it's important that the team take control and inventory of who's there. In fact, I'll even go one step further. The Scrum Master doesn't always have to be at the retro. If the team wants to nominate someone else to facilitate for that meeting, a third party and objective, other than the Scrum Master for whatever reason, they certainly should be allowed to do so. Now, it doesn't mean that the Scrum Master doesn't add value or that they shouldn't be there. I'm just saying if the team chooses for a sprint not to have them there, that's totally fine. I think the message I'm trying to send here, the key message is that too much money, more money is wasted in this than anything else. Meetings tend to be that endless money pit. So we want to make sure that you understand that we don't want to throw money at something, unnecessarily if we don't have to. We want to make sure that our focus is on, streamlining this, keeping it slim, getting the right people in there with the right agenda, sticking to the agenda, having good focus, and wrapping up what we need to do. And I think this one ties very closely to the next one, and that's identifying what our product or service release cycles are going to be. So when we come in here and we're trying to figure out, what is the right cadence for us to deliver a product or service to our end consumer, whether it's an internal consumer or an external consumer, doesn't matter. We're just trying to figure out what that right cadence is. How often should we be delivering things to them? One of the things that I see all the time is this date-driven model, which I'm okay with. If you're following SAFe or other things, it's important for us to find a date, stick with a date, and move. But the problem becomes sometimes we want to push the button and launch the rocket, and we still have team members inside who are trying to get critical work done, right? I think it's important for us to have balance. And I think that the organization and the customer, trying to please everybody can be challenging, because sometimes you'll have an organization that wants to move, at hyper speed, and you have consumers that aren't ready. I was working with a cruise line where some of the cruise constituents, if you will, were older in age, and they didn't want changes every single sprint. They wanted to, get used to what they were doing, have the changes be small and simple, and just kind of let the changes ease their way in. And then if there were any major changes, they wanted tutorials to help them understand what the changes were. And it just made sense because of the target audience, right? So I think part of this is that the people on the ground often want to flex and say, what additional features am I going to get if we go one more sprint or two more sprints? Or what am I going to lose if we end one sprint early so we can beat our competitor to market? And while both of those are critical and important to understand, I think that we need to know that these are our cycles, this is our cadence, and we need to focus, whether it's DevOps or whether it's how we frame up our release cycles. We need to understand what our end goal is, and we need to do what makes sense and stick to a cycle that makes sense. So if our cadence is once a year or twice a year or once a quarter, or whatever it might be, every couple of weeks even, some people do continuous flow and continuous integration, continuous deployment. I'm fine with that as well. I think the key here, though, is to establish and figure out what that release cycle is and make sure that we understand internally and can broadcast externally when we think that something's going to hit, right? So this one is all based on common sense. We need to do what makes sense for the organization, for the customer, for our people. Next up, we have measuring end consumer satisfaction. Now, taking time to measure their satisfaction, it's critical. And it can't just be acceptance criteria, because sometimes the person who writes the acceptance criteria may not be the person who's closest to the consumer and understand. So, social media sentiment also may not be enough. We need to, have some type of observation in place. We need to have some type of feedback mechanism, whether it's feedback at a demo, which is obviously the best thing, or whether it's customer interviews, or whether it's trying to research or shadow what the customer does as they're working in a product or service. I think it's just important for us to have a good balance so that we can understand how the customer interacts with our products or service and what we need to do to determine whether the product is successful and whether our consumer is happy. One of the examples I like to give is I worked for an organization for a small time where their whole focus was on acceptance criteria that was written by the product owner to make sure that the product itself was a success. But when the law enforcement agents in the field tried to use this product, what they quickly found was that it was overwhelming or daunting, and it didn't have everything in a place where it needed to be. So even though the product itself was incredibly successful and had all the possible bells and widgets and tools and things that you could ever use, no one liked using it because it was overwhelming. So I think you need to have a good balance there as well. You can't have a product that works, that's functional, that doesn't make anyone happy. So I think you need both. And I think this is the piece that we most often miss. Or the flip side, I've seen organizations where all they focus on is, are every single one of our customers happy? And what winds up happening is they spread the net so wide that you can't make everyone happy all the time. So instead of focusing on who the target consumer was, and using personas and journey mapping and story mapping to figure out who they were trying to make happy and how, they were just casting a wide net, trying to make everyone happy. And what ends up happening there, of course, is no one's happy. Everyone finds that it could be doing a little more. So I think part of this is discovering who your target audience is and figuring out. Once you got that figured out, then you figure out a means of how you're going to determine and track whether they're happy and then whether your product is successful based on usage, based on statistics, based on interviews, based on interactive customer games, based on social media sentiment. You could gather direct user observation. You can gather that information and pull it together and come up with a really good report that's going to measure end consumer satisfaction. So now that we know that our customer's happy and we've got our head on right, and we understand all the roles and responsibilities, next we want to focus on programming practices. Now, many people look at me and say, but I'm not building a software product. Even if you're not building a software product, maybe you can focus on best build practices or best assembly practices or best integration practices. Whatever it is that you're doing, you can adapt this to meet the need of what you're trying to do. But for the sake of today's session, I'm going to focus on programming as in software programming, just to keep it easy and to make it clean. So enhancing your programming practices is critical, right? Unit testing should always be 100%. You shouldn't let a line of code go without doing unit testing. Code review, once again, 100%. Refactoring poorly designed code, 100%. We shouldn't let these things just sit around forever and not make any adaptations, right, or any adjustments. You should have a clear coding standard in place. Now, I had a developer really get on my back about this one. They said, "Are you trying to say we should have extensive documentation in our code?" And my answer was, of course not. I just want to make sure that you have some type of standard in place. So if someone goes in and tries to look at your code, they'll understand how it's written, how it's broken down, the taxonomy, that they'll understand, how a class is built and what it means and how it's structured, so that anyone who looks at this code could easily determine and say, I know what they were trying to do here. This makes sense to me. And I think that that's the piece that's missing here. This is the core functionality when you're building new software, or anything else for that matter, right? So if you're building a house or building a building or providing a service, I think the key here is, if you're trying to measure forward progress, you need to see it in a demo of working results. So one of the things that I often do when I go into organizations, I try to get some of the senior people together with the junior people, and we talk about, what are some of the latest trends that have come out with regard to, technology or coding, and what are some of the things that we should be doing to help firm it up and to make it easy to understand, because this is it's a small investment up front to yield, much more favorable, deep results at the end. So one of the things I've discovered is small investment up front, big results later. It's a win-win situation. Okay, so moving on, I think now that we have our programming practices in place, we need to talk a little bit about testing practices. This is one of my favorite images. Caution, live tigers. Just give a holler when you feel something. I don't care how good that suit is. I don't think it's going to work. But when I talk about testing practices, I think sometimes we always think of just QA or QE, and we think of just the actual physical testing of code. That's not exactly where I'm going. When I'm talking about testing, I'm talking about some form of test-driven design or development, where you're setting a test in place first to validate before, a line of code's ever written, or before we actually execute anything. So that way we could write tests in such a way that we're not constantly building things to satisfy criteria that doesn't need to be met. So one of the things that I see often working is that teams will set up a standard for testing, so anyone can go in and read that test and understand exactly what it does and how it works, and whether it's part of a class or whether it's part of a testing script or part of a testing harness, that we can understand exactly what it's trying to do. But I want to make sure that beyond that we really are thinking of testing first. And when I say that, urban design, or to human factor design, or to making sure we're doing journey mapping or story mapping, having ways to understand what we're trying to do. So if we're doing these things, we understand who our target audience is, and we can validate and test by feature that it meets the things that we're trying to do. So even acceptance tests should be written, and set apart at the very beginning of the sprint, so that we know that we're not overbuilding, so that we're building just enough to satisfy the acceptance criteria and not building more than necessary. We want to make sure we have a good focus on what we're trying to do, and that it's easy for us to maintain that focus. So testing is a lot more than just, actual unit test or code test. Testing to me is making sure that all the functionality is in place to help satisfy a goal. And if something doesn't satisfy that goal, what new items do we need to create in order to, satisfy the goal that should be satisfied? And it's a lot to keep track of. There's a ton of things that we need to focus on and keep track of. And that brings me to, finding the right solution, right? So there are tooling solutions out there, and I love this little analogy. So I thought nails was a foreign word for screws. If you got a box of nails and a box of screwdrivers, you're not going to get very far. It's hard to pound in nails with a screwdriver. Try it. It's not fun. What I will tell you is that there are so many different tooling solutions out there. You've got, the Azure solution. You've got HP's Agile Center. You've got, CollabNet version 1. You've got, the Rally solution. You've got, a more popular solution, Jira. There are tons of tooling solutions out there to help you best manage your Agile project management. I think the answer here lies in, don't get a tool to drive your process. Figure out what you're trying to do as an organization and select a tool that best maps to what you're trying to do. Don't try to adapt what you're doing to the tool standards. Try to adapt the tool to meet what you're doing. Because I think if you let the tool drive what you're doing, in most cases, it's going to drive you to do something that just may not make sense for your organization, or it may cause you grief or struggle. I had one organization that said that when they were sold a tool, that they were told that this would help eliminate the use of 3 or 4 other tools. And the salesperson did a good job of convincing this organization that they wouldn't have to keep track of a lot of things, including how long it took their people or how many hours people put in a day. So we found that there were a lot of people from the talent management office, i.e., human resources, who wanted to go into the tool. In this case, it was version 1, and they said, we need access to that tool so that we can write out time cards. And literally they were saying, this person only worked 6.2 hours this day. And even though these people weren't paid by the hour, they were creating these productivity reports and sending them to management to let management know that there were individuals who were consistently working below productivity standards. And it blew my mind to see how, access to a tool was abused so poorly that it caused strife and it caused tension between management and teams. And, they ended up calling in an agile coach, thank goodness. And when I went in, I was able to help correct and steer the ship right. But my goodness, this was a simple example of a tool, driving a wedge between what the team was trying to do in the organization, which was a nightmare. Apparently this person hadn't heard of the Toyota and Covey study, where they said that the average worker works just under 6 hours, 5.896 hours a day. They were unaware of that statistic, so they were assuming that everyone who went to work worked for 8 hours a day until they stayed as long as they needed to put in their 8 hours, which is rather interesting. But I think here what we're trying to say is that not every tool does everything. So you need to keep a close eye on the progress of what your team and organization is doing. You need to see your products at a certain level. There are lots of handy dandy tools. I tell people all the time, even sticky notes are okay, or index cards and a whiteboard. It doesn't need to be something high tech. But if you're scaling across organizations, and especially in these days of COVID where everyone's working remote, it is important to select a tool. And if you start with something simple like Jira, where it's just simple and free and easy to use for a few users, hey, why not? But if your organization has another tool in place, or if they're using a Microsoft suite of products, then use the Azure Agile piece, right? It does most things well and it'll get the job done. But I think what I'm trying to say is don't let the tool drive what you're going to do. Let what you do drive which tool you select. And I think if you turn the focus that way and shift it, that you're going to be okay, because tool selection shouldn't be taken lightly. Because I'll tell you firsthand, having worked closely with some of these tool vendors, it's hard to navigate and get everything transferred over from one tool to another. So I think it's important that you make the right decision up front. Let's talk about celebrating team success. This is one that we don't talk about often enough. I think this is also funny. Welcome to work, yay! And this guy's like, you don't have to celebrate me coming into work every day, right? Guy popping out of the cake. It's just kind of funny. But you'd be surprised that teams celebrate the wrong things, and oftentimes they miss out on celebrating the right things. I worked in an organization where we had an executive, a leader who wanted to celebrate every time that his team did anything. So he would often award, different things to the team. So one of his favorite things to award were gift cards or actual honey baked ham. So it didn't matter what you did. Here's a honey baked ham. Little did he realize that many people on the team culturally didn't eat ham, which I thought was quite interesting. But it was just one of these things where, if you use the wrong incentive and if you're not celebrating team success properly, you need to figure out what you can do. Now, on the flip side, I've been in an organization where, the team did everything manually. So they had these cards that were printed out, and before the cards were ordered, the CEO of the company requested that some of the cards, and he had some printed, that they had an invisible ink type feature on the back where it had a number. And that if you were working on stories, that these cards were intermixed with all the other cards. And if you were working on stories and you printed out your stories, you had no idea what they were, you put them on your backlog. At the conclusion the story creation session, and at the conclusion of the you completed everything at sprint planning. So at the conclusion of the sprint, if you finish something during that sprint, you would have an opportunity as a team member to put it underneath a black light, and you could see if it had a number on the back or not. And if it had a number, whatever prize was associated with that number was the prize that you won. And those things included, simple things like, free lunch in the cafeteria to an extra day off of work. One was a lease to a Jeep for a year. So I think that I've seen so many organizations really, find creative ways to help teams outside of, how many story points did you complete? That drives me crazy. I think that part of this is, are you meeting your sprint goals? Are you consistently having positive feedback on the things that you do? Are you having less rework? Are you working together to swarm towards getting products or services built and initialized and submitted? What are you doing to help the organization brainstorm new ideas? How are you working towards innovation? How are you as an individual adding value or contributing? And while I don't want to measure individuals at face value, I certainly want to make sure that the team has the power to self-regulate so that they can figure out how they best can work together and how they can get to a point where they're high-performing teams. So we go through the Tupman model: forming, storming, norming, performing. I think that most organizations don't take the time to recognize positive accomplishments, even if it's something as simple as clapping when someone completes something. I know it sounds silly, but it'll get to the point where the team will get used to it. They like to have that acknowledgement. They like to be recognized. So I just think it's important for us to find creative ways to help the team feel like their contributions are appreciated, and not just only measure, what the end user thinks is important. Question here about best advice to promote team success or growth performance versus individual growth performance, because they're both important, right? And I think that's the key. And I think we sort of covered that just now. I think that individuals need to have introspect or introspectives, kind of like a retrospective, but it's just you, where they measure, what are key targets for improvement, what are some things that they can do better. I think that if they take the time to measure these things, that they're going to quickly discover that there are certain things that they could be doing to add better value to themselves as an individual and helping the team grow, versus the team where we use the retrospective or leverage the retrospective to figure out, what are some steps that we could be doing together as a team in order to be successful. So there's lots of opportunity here, I guess, is what it boils down to. So great questions. I'm loving this. So I'm getting lots of feedback here, which is great. This is a good one. So somebody asked about if your company has a tool that they paid for, a license for, and then they make the team work around a tool that they already have going because they've already paid for a license for something else. It's interesting. I think part of this is, where we talk about setting realistic executive and leadership expectations. Sometimes we need to let them know if the tool that they've selected is not working and why. And I think that that's something that's, a hard conversation to have, but one that should be had by, a qualified Scrum Master, Agile coach, someone who can get in there and really help the organization understand that maybe the tool they selected wasn't great. I know it's a late question, but good question. So I think the key is this, there's no organization in the world that's perfect. I know it's hard to believe because you think yours is, but there's no organization in the world that is perfect. And I think that, when we go in and we start evaluating, there's always going to be something to improve. There's this thought of Kaizen, continuous improvement, right? And we need to identify what issues are outstanding, what things haven't we addressed, what plan of action we're going to take to get there. I often use the GROW model here. What's our goal? What are we trying to achieve, right? What is our, once we understand our goal, what's our reality? Where are we now? How far away are we from that goal? What opportunities do we have? What options do we have to move forward? And then what will we commit to do? And if you continuously just cycle through and find a couple of little things you can do each and every sprint, what you're going to quickly discover is that over time, you're going to get significantly better at what you do. And I think the big thing here is just, no list is all inclusive. This is a great starting point, but it was never intended to be an all inclusive list. And this sounds like a sales pitch, but I promise you it's not intended to be. I think it's critical that most organizations engage with an agile coach, especially one from the outside. Because what will happen is, even if it's just for a short time, even if it's just for a few sprints, what you're going to quickly discover is that the agile coach on the outside is going to have a different view looking in than any of your internal coaches would from the inside. And they'll be able to help you identify some of these key initiatives or key things that you need to work on, these key adaptations, the key things that you need to improve. And I think that these opportunities are here and they present themselves often, but do we see them? And I think a lot of times it's hard to see the trees through the forest, right? It's an opportunity for us to grow as an organization and to really, get our head around what's going on and to really figure out what the next step should be. And I think that if you have the right coach engaged, if you've got the right team approach and you've got realistic expectations set for leadership and you're doing all the things in this 12-step program, I think you're going to be okay. But I also think having that external factor, there's something to be said for that. So the one thing I didn't tell you is there's some homework that goes along with this. So the homework for this one is, I want you to take your 12-step guide, and you can download a copy of that on agiledad.com. Under the comic section, we have a comic book version of this. And what I want you to do is set a calendar reminder for 30 days out, 60 days out, and 90 days out. And I want you to pick one or two of these. And I want you to mark and say, here's where we are today. And here's how I want you to do it. If it's something that you're doing and you're doing well, so go through all 12 steps. If it's something you're doing and you're doing well, give yourself a check box or check mark. Check mark means we're doing it, we got it, we're doing it well. And you're going to go back 30, 60, and 90 days from now and make sure you're still doing it well. If it's something that you're like, oh, wow, we're doing that, but we got a lot of room for improvement, put a dash or a hyphen. And that's going to indicate that there's an opportunity for improvement, right? And then once again, check in at 30, 60, and 90 days and see if you can get that hyphen to a check mark. And then, of course, if it's something that you've never touched at all, if it's something you've never done at all, put an X there saying, we haven't even talked about this yet. And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. X doesn't mean bad. X is okay, right? X just means that, oh, wow, this is something we need to think about, right? So it just opens up a doorway for something for you to think about, something that you can improve. And I think that, once again, if you get the right person involved, especially someone external. So we had a question regarding the difference between an agile coach and a scrum master. While scrum masters are internal and team specific, coaches tend to be organizational or enterprise specific. And there's usually very few coaches, or I should say enterprise level coaches within an organization. Most only have one or two. And these are the shepherds that guide the entire organization and help establish an internal agile center of excellence. They help you focus on the things that you could be doing best, and they help you really engage so that the whole organization can see benefits from applying these 12 steps. So lots to take in here. I didn't dive super deep into any one of the 12 steps. Good news is, if you need a shot of this, if you go over to the podcast this week, on Monday, we cover steps 1, 2, and 3, Tuesday, 4, 5, and 6, Wednesday, 7, 8, and 9. So we talk about these again in the Agile Dad Daily Stand-Up Podcast. So if you haven't had a chance to go listen to that, or if you want someone else to hear, of course, you can let them know that those are there. In addition, we are live casting it. So I appreciate all of you. I see there's almost 100 people on the live cast. I appreciate that. Thanks for being here. We love to have you, tell your peers about this and come back later. We are recording the session, so you can come back later and you can see it. We had a question about that. So we want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to get this. And of course, the documents, the comic books that are on our website, you can download these. They're free to distribute, as long as you don't change attribution. Of course, you can distribute them to anybody you'd like. We'd love to, and we have some teams that we go into their office and have some of these printed out, kind of like motivational posters hanging on the wall. And I think that's just super cool because it helps you gain focus and it's a visual reminder of what you need to be doing. So there's lots of cool things you can do with these, right? So our goal is just to help you improve as an organization. We want to see you get better. And even if it means saying, hey, here's, you don't need a coach yet. You just need to work on these two things and we'll come back when it's time. We like to make sure that we stay focused and we help you gain the best value you can. So the keys here to success. Number 1, review your 12 steps. Determine where you are today. Set a reminder to review every 30 days until 90 days to see what kind of progress you're making. Don't be afraid to do that, right? Involve people at all levels and create your own internal Agile center of excellence where maybe you can focus on one of these per couple of sprints or one of these a quarter or whatever the case may be. But, my one reminder is if you have debt first, focus on the debt first, right? So if you have outstanding technical debt, focus there first. We had a whole session, a webinar on that, and that's why we did it in that order. We want you to address that first, then come here and address these things. You could do some at the same time, but some of these steps are hard if you have a lot of debt outstanding. Create clear visual indicators for everyone so that they can see progress you made. And, remember to celebrate team success. Find ways to engage, get the team involved, get people happy, celebrate what's going on. Once again, this list is not, it's not required to be done in order, right? So however it works best for your team, if it does work best if it's implemented in order, right? And I realize there's a spelling or a English error there. I apologize. Remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not an all or nothing initiative. So, make adjustments as needed to find the greatest success. And as always, you can visit the AgileDad website. You can download the comic book. You can download the presentation. It's all going to be there. And of course, we have the video where you can have people come and watch. We do encourage you to let people know about the upcoming events. We're trying to get some more on the calendar, and it's with your help that we can do so. And this is where I really need your help. If you have a topic that you feel like should be covered in an AgileDad webinar or in an AgileDad episode of the Daily Stand-Up podcast, we want to encourage you to submit your topic. You can submit it here in the chat. You can submit it to learn more, LEARNMORE at agiledad.com. We are looking for your topics. We have a few, but I want to make sure we get a big bucket of them so that we can continue to pound through your topics and get through those things, because we want to make sure we're providing you with as much high quality, free, Agile information as we possibly can. So on behalf of the entire team at AgileDad, including my favorite personal team here, we want to say thank you. There's lots of things that we could be doing with our time, and I can't express how much I appreciate you carving away an hour to spend with me today. I feel like we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and I hope that you'll go back and review this so that you can catch anything that you missed there. And as always, we encourage you, if you have any questions, any kind of information that you need, or if your company is looking for coaching or training, reach out to AgileDad. We'd love to help you in any way that we can. It's important for us to celebrate, and I think that's where I want to draw my focus today to end this presentation and take your questions. But I want to leave you with a thought first. And, I think that sometimes we don't celebrate enough. And what I mean by that is, especially in this time where everybody's just kind of down and out, and, things have been rough and people haven't been able to leave their homes as much as they want. And people are debating whether or not they have to wear a mask or what they should do. And between the political turmoil and all the tension and things in the world today, I think one of the things that we need to do is find things that we can celebrate. So it's just so important for us to celebrate family, to celebrate friends, to celebrate our team members. And, it's just so important for us to extend ourselves to others and to be at the service of others. Because no matter what you do, if you can find yourself and lose yourself in the service of others, you're going to be a happier person. And I think that, happiness is contagious, and it's going to rub off on other people, and it's going to make it a position where other people want to be around you. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, but I do want to focus on, making sure I answer all of your questions. So without any further ado, on behalf of the team at AgileDad, thank you so much for being here. We love having you. And once again, invite your friends, invite those that are close to you, invite your teams. And until next time, make sure you take care. We are going to open up for questions.